You say good, Thomas, or? Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody on Facebook. Happy Father's Day. All of us fathers need to stick together, and unity is the message that I have today, so it's the perfect segue. The lesson today comes from Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 21 through 28. I'm going to read the text first, and then we'll go through the lesson context and start going through the verses. And say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will take the Israelites out of the nations where they have gone. I will gather them from all around and bring them back into their own land. I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel. There will be one king over all them, and they will never again be two nations or divided into two kingdoms. They will no longer defile themselves with their idols and vile images, or with any of their offenses, for I will save them from all their sinful backsliding, and I will cleanse them. They will be my people, and I will be their God. My servant David will be king over them, and they will all have one shepherd. They will follow my laws and be careful to keep my decrees. They will live in the land I gave to my servant Jacob, the land where your ancestors lived. They and their children's children will live there forever, and David, my servant, will be their prince forever. I will make a covenant of peace with them. It will be an everlasting covenant. I will establish them and increase their numbers, and I will put my sanctuary among them forever. My dwelling place will be with them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Then the nations will know that I, the Lord, make Israel holy when my sanctuary is among them forever. So Ezekiel, especially chapter 37, when you think of that, I think everybody probably thinks of the Valley of the Dry Bones, which is the verses that precede this. That's a powerful visual, but there's also the visual of the two sticks and bringing the two sticks together. That's what immediately precedes these verses. And in the lesson context, it says, Ezekiel lived at the time Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians in 586 BC. That destruction and accompanying exile was preceded by two other deportations. The first of those came in 605 BC when Daniel and his friends were taken captive to Babylon. Ezekiel's relocation to Babylon became part of the second deportation as he found himself among the 10,000 of the elite citizenry taken in 597 BC. Daniel and other Jews were taken to serve in the king's palace, while Ezekiel found himself among the exiles by the Kibar River, where the hand of the Lord was on him. The book of Ezekiel features many astonishing word pictures. One of the most famous is that of the Valley of the Dry Bones in Ezekiel chapter 37, 1 through 14. It's followed by the much less famous illustration of the two sticks. Both of these metaphors speak of the restoration of Israel while emphasizing different aspects of that reunification. Today's lesson explores the significance of the metaphor involving the two sticks. As our text opens, Ezekiel had just been directed to show to an audience the stick on which he had written belonging to Judah and the Israelites associated with him, and a second stick on which he had written belonging to Joseph and all the Israelites associated with him. And the explanation follows. So that's where this lesson picks up. He's just shown the two sticks, one with belonging to Joseph and one belonging to Judah. And the verses 21 picks up immediately after that. At verse 21, and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. So the beginning word and connects what follows with the previous verses that introduce the imagery of the two sticks. The explanation which now begins is introduced by the familiar declarative phrase, this is what the sovereign Lord says. This phrase and its variations occur hundreds of times in the Old Testament, and what follows is authoritative. So when it begins and, he's tying in the previous verses with the visual of the two sticks with what's about to follow, which is authoritative. It's coming from the Lord. Verses 21b. I will take the Israelites out of the nations where they have gone. I will gather them from all around and bring them back into their own land. This verse introduces a series of Thomas is the most popular. As you know from childhood, anybody that carries AA batteries around, you want that person with you. When you need AA batteries, you don't ever have them. And that goes for any other kind of battery you need. So it said, we were talking about the split into the two nations following the death of King Solomon. It said that situation may have seemed permanent given the facts of 2 exiles and the passage of 3.5 centuries. But Ezekiel expected the 12 tribes of Israel to be reunified nonetheless. So this section in particular goes into the 12 tribes, which I thought kind of gives some context into what we're talking about as far as reunification goes. The 12 tribes of Israel were descended from the 12 sons of the patriarch Jacob, who died about 1860 BC, and who had his name changed to Israel. In time, the names Israel and Ephraim became synonyms in referring to the 10 northern tribes, while Judah became the designation for the 2 southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin. So when they're talking about the 2 sticks, one that has Israel written on it, you're talking about the 10 northern tribes. And when you talk about the stick that has Judah written on it, you're talking about the 2 southern tribes. So when he talks about reunification, this is what he's talking about. When no longer divided between the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, the people would enjoy a renewed unity. This reunification would happen under one king, in distinction to the 2 kings that had characterized divided Israel between 931 and 722 BC. A difficulty here, of course, is that the monarchy was not restored after the return from Babylonian exile. Instead, the people had governors. Promises such as Ezekiel's here came to be seen not as literal predictions of a singular human king ruling in a specific place, but as anticipating the Messiah whose rule would encompass all things. So he's not talking literally of one king rule. He's speaking in terms of a Messiah who would rule all. So he's speaking metaphorically here. Verses 23a, they will no longer defile themselves with their idols and vile images or with any of their offenses. The forthcoming restoration was also to be characterized by the end of idolatry in all its forms. The worship of false gods was the prime reason for all of Israelites' problems. It had led to the defilement of the land in general and of the temple in particular. So, the next verse we go into, it talks about sinful backsliding, which we know from reading is kind of the cycle that would go on. There would be the covenant made, and then they would wander, which is it's easy to read, and we get angry at that. But when you look at that, that's no different than our Christian walk today. We can recenter ourselves, and then we backslide. And idolatry, when we read it biblically, you think about these golden idols, that people would worship. Obviously, I don't think any of us do that, but idols now are more superficial. They're more subtle, and we can still fall into those same patterns that they find themselves falling into. 23b, for I will save them from all their sinful backsliding, and I will cleanse them. It says, however deep Israel's problem with idolatry had been in the past, Ezekiel prophesied that the future would be different. Ezekiel did not think that the people could completely purge idolatry by their own willpower. Rather, God was to cleanse them. The people would experience the sort of physical and spiritual purification necessary for anyone going to the temple to worship. The forthcoming purification would affect all of life with God and life with one another. So just like we said, when we fall into these same patterns, we can't do it on our own. You have to have the willpower from Him to be able to kind of move past that and refocus. Verses 23c, they will be my people and I will be their God. The wholeness of the approach becomes clear in the last line of the verse. Instead of being alienated, people suffering under divine judgment, the returning exiles will again become God's people. Verse 24, my servant David will be king over them. This verse expands on verse 22 above in specifying the one king to be David. It says Davidic kingship, not just monarchy in general, was being prophesied. Ezekiel did not expect the literal, physical reincarnation of that ancient ruler who had been dead for nearly 400 years by Ezekiel's day. Rather, the expectation was that the rise of the new ruler was to be like David in one or more ways. So he's not literally saying that David will be the king. Obviously, at this point, as it says, David's been dead for 400 years. He's talking about David's qualities, the best qualities of David and more. When we read that it's referencing the Messiah, that's what you're getting. You're getting the best parts of David, but you're getting more than they could probably even fathom. Verses 24b, and they will all have one shepherd. Anyone who rules over God's people should function as a shepherd. That designation describes someone who protects others from harm. The one shepherd to come would stand in stark contrast to the worthless shepherds who had exploited the people. 24c, they will follow my laws and be careful to keep my decrees. It says this partial verse describes the behavior of people that will result from the rule of the one shepherd king to come. People tend to behave as their leaders do, and this fact was a driver of ending up in exile. The shepherd king will be a model of behavior that reflects the opposite. And I think we see that today. We even us, we tend to kind of act as those in authority do. It's kind of a trickle-down effect. So what they're speaking to here is that the shepherd will behave in a way that makes the people want to follow the shepherd, and not into exile, but into this new covenant. Verse 25, they will live in the land I gave my servant Jacob, the land where your ancestors lived. They and their children and their children's children will live there forever, and David, my servant, will be their prince forever. It talks about this is basically restating promises that were already mentioned, but the change here is the word forever. It said it adds a new idea. The return to the land and the rule by David, the servant, will both be permanent in some sense. And it goes on to talk about, as these commentaries, those of you who teach this, the commentaries really like to tell you what these words mean. Sometimes that can kind of fly over my head, but it talks about the Hebrew wording behind forever is not necessarily how we look at it. It's not an eternity without end. It could signify age enduring or to the end of the age. But the premise is the same in that, the word forever now, this is not just okay, you can have it here. This is an expansion of it. Verses 26. I will make a covenant of peace with them. It will be an everlasting covenant. I will establish them and increase their numbers, and I will put my sanctuary among them forever. In the Bible, a covenant indicated a long-term, usually permanent agreement between two parties in which each party assumed a set of responsibilities. Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28 describe the relationship between God and Israel as a covenant. When the Israelites violated the terms of the covenant, God gave them chances to repent. But when they refused, the punishments of the covenant were activated. The ultimate punishment involved Israel's expulsion from its own land, which is exactly where we are in this lesson. Ezekiel insisted that even after the catastrophe of exile, God would renew the covenant. Ezekiel calls the new arrangement a covenant of peace, a designation he also uses in Ezekiel 34:25. So when I read this, you think of, when you hear of wars, when you study wars in history, when there's a peace agreement, the peace agreement always comes with, small print. There's, okay, you can have peace as long as you do this, this, and this. And when you go back to the previous verse and it symbolizes, this is something forever, this feels different. This is, obviously you've seen them backslide, you've seen them suffer expulsion twice. So I think at this point, this covenant's different. This is a peace covenant. It says the focal point of the people's renewal increase in numbers was to be the rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. That building was a symbol of God's abiding presence among the people. The promised peace would therefore be more than an absence of conflict. So see, this is different. This expands beyond just that there's nobody fighting. Peace can come in multiple ways. You can think, well, when you've had two people at war with each other, well, they're not fighting right now, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's peace. Peace is a little bit deeper than that. Rather, it was to be a condition in which the people would flourish as God intended. Ezekiel insisted that this new arrangement would be in some sense permanent. So this goes back to the previous explanation of forever. Verse 27, my dwelling place will be with them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. And it says, Paul quotes this verse in 2 Corinthians, and there he uses temple in place of dwelling place. The two serve the same function in the Old Testament, the temple being the successor and permanent version of the portable dwelling place of the tabernacle. But Paul's usage was in the wider context of Christians personally being the temple of the living God. It says, the Israelites knew, of course, that God did not literally reside in a building in the same way that the human beings do. Yet the temple was sort of a magnet for the prayers of the faithful as they sought God's guidance and protection. A wrong view eventually came into thinking when the people held the temple in such high regard that they viewed it as something of a good luck charm that made them immune from attack. Even so, the verse at hand emphasizes the willingness of God to be among the people who were to return from exile and to aid them in various ways. So when I read that, how often do we do that? I do that. I'll come in here and I'll sit there and I'll think, well, I'm here, so I'm good. I kind of I'll find myself looking at this place as a good luck charm sometime. It's enough that we're here. We don't have to do anything else. We came to church on Sunday, we're good. But when it talks about the magnet for the prayers of the faithful, I feel like when we come here, you'll leave empty if there's not a transaction that takes place. You got to put something in here and you got to take something out. And that's more than just walking into a building and sitting down and then thinking that you're immune from everything. So that one really spoke to me. And then in verse 28, it said, then the nations will know that I, the Lord, make Israel holy when my sanctuary is among them forever. And this one the section concludes by announcing the awareness of non-Israelites to God's intent for Israel. So he's not only speaking to those who will inhabit the temple, he's speaking to the non-Israelites too. Obviously, you want people to notice, still that today, we want people that drive by here, even if they don't necessarily go here, we want that to be a light to them, for them to see that God is a presence. One of the inserts here, when healing becomes testimony, it says, the mother held her baby for the last time. Tears poured down her cheeks as she rocked the unconscious infant. Engulfed in her grief, she seemed oblivious to her husband's attempt to comfort her. Each of the other mothers present felt the stab of grief as if it were her own. When this mother rose to leave, she paused at the door to look at her baby one last time, sure she could not live a whole life without him. Several years later, this same woman organized a retreat for mothers grieving for the same reason. She had found comfort and healing in relationships with other moms who had lost children, and she determined to pass that comfort along. It's been said that God never wastes your pain, and hers was not wasted. The scriptures witness frequently to God's promise to heal his people's pain. Those watching would know that God had extended great care to his people. And how could God use your difficult experiences as testimony to greatness and salvation? Obviously, I've not experienced something as traumatic as that. I know people that have, and I do understand what this insert's talking about, though. When you see those people and you see them go through life and can still be joyful and can still praise God, that's an inspiration to me. That just shows that when you have that within you, there's nothing outside that can break you. It's like the metaphor of the two sticks. It can make it whole again. In conclusion, rebuilding a community after any kind of disaster is difficult work. For progress to be made, those affected must acknowledge their pain, find resources for renewed hope, and take practical steps to build a new life. The Judean prophets, priests, and other leaders of the 6th century BC took precisely those steps during and after Babylonian exile, and God made sure that they did. Connecting practical steps with the values, commitments, and dreams of a congregation presents an ongoing challenge, as all church leaders know. We easily drift into saying we must do something. Here is something, therefore we must do this. Clear thinking about why we need to act in a certain way easily gets lost. Ezekiel made sure that his audience thought deeply about what to do and why. He held out the hope not just of reclaiming lost spaces and practices, but of re-entering the deeper meaning of those very spaces and practices. We need constant renewal in this regard. Before assuming that God is on our side, we should ask, are we on his? The latter question will invite a season of self-reflection and prayer that in turn puts us in a good position for being equipped with everything good for doing his will. Through Jesus Christ, to whom be glory forever and ever. So I thought that said it better than I can. You know, you look at where we are as a church, you look at where Christianity is in this country and abroad, there's schism there. You know, there's division. So you obviously this whole lesson has spoke to unity, but it's easy to say, well, we need unity, but how do you do that? You know, that requires everybody working together. And the vision that obviously we have for this church, I think as we go through that, we have to ask that question. God is on our side, are we on his? And I think when we answer that question, if we can answer that correctly and we can say yes, then, you know, everything will come. So that's what I got out of this. Hopefully you all got something out of this, and everybody can enjoy Father's Day and eat and maybe take a nap. Thank you.